afternoon, everybody. No, take a seat. Take a seat.
How are you?
Hi, very well. And how are you?
Thanks very much. Very well, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Are we all ready? IT people, are you right? Is everything set as it ought to be? Okay, thank you very much. How do you pronounce your surname?
Musaji.
Musaji, not Musaji.
Musaji.
Okay, all right. Are you going to take the oath or are you going to affirm?
I can do either, whatever's easier for you.
Okay, well, let me use, let me then take the, let me swear you. Your is Mohammed, ne?
Correct.
Mohammed Abdul Samad Musaji.
That's correct. Our dad's name was part of our names in those days.
Okay.
Your father's name was part of your name.
Okay. All right. Mr. Mohammed Abdul Samad Musaji, or Musaji, do you swear that the evidence that you are going to give to this inquiry is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? And if that is so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Who was sworn in. There you are. Mr. July, do you want to lead Mr. Musaji on his affidavit, or do you want to?
Yeah, I would.
You are ready to address us on
Thank
the piece
you.
of your report.
Thank you.
Yes.
There were just 2 points. The first was that I thought that I would rather voice the testimony and then open it up to questions.
Oh, yeah.
And just to,
Oh, yeah. No,
so we don't lose our train of thought.
Yeah.
Initially, I thought that because of the involvement in sport and qualifications had been addressed in the first 30 paragraphs, I wanted to start on page 5, para 31. But speaking to Fumisa, she said that there's some important information up front. So I'll skim through the first 4 pages, and then we'll go into the meat on page 5.
That is.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So at the outset, I want to start by commending Cricket South Africa for agreeing to run this process and for you to be tasked with this important responsibility. It's interesting that from a Proteas perspective, we've almost had our mini-own SJN Hearings for the past 10 years when our culture camp started. And one of the players told me at one stage is that this should have happened when all the cricket bodies got together in our country and they agreed to unite. It's unfortunate that it's only happening 30 years later, but it's never too late.
In 1991.
1991, yeah, but it's never too late. And then obviously with the COVID pandemic, I've been quite busy at my practice, so I haven't really followed everything at the hearings, but I've been catching a few things through the media and through some of the colleagues that have been listening into it. So I grew up in Lenasia and matriculated at a school, public government school called Lenasia Secondary School. From a young age, I played a vast variety of sports, including athletics, shot put, javelin, discus, but soccer, cricket and volleyball were the main sports. I was fortunate enough to captain the Transvaal High School soccer and cricket team at the time, as well as represent captain the South African high schools team. Following my selection for the South African high schools team when I was in Standard 8, I was also fortunate enough to play for the South African or the Transvaal senior cricket team at the time. From a football background, I played semi-professional football for Fordsburg City, and I was part of the Bluebells Football Club in the Federation Professional League. Currently, I am the head team physician for Kaizer Chiefs Football Club. But don't talk about we're doing okay, we're getting there, guys. Okay, from a studies perspective, I matriculated in 1986. Interestingly enough, the club I played for at the time, Pirates Cricket Club, were keen to send me overseas to play cricket. But for a black South African at the time, the opportunities to earn a decent income through cricket was very limited. I decided, therefore, not to take up the opportunity and to play cricket overseas, and instead embarked on my studies at Wits University. One of my teachers tried to encourage me to apply for a sports bursary at Wits University. Given that I played schools cricket and provincial cricket, he thought that I had a good chance of being awarded that bursary. However, I was aware that if the university awarded me a bursary, I would be expected to play cricket for them. And they played under the auspices of the South African Cricket Union, which was rival to the South African Cricket Board, the non-racial cricket board that we played under. So from the school days, I mean, being politically conscious, I supported the SAICO stance of no normal sport in an abnormal society.
Yes.
I completed a pharmacy degree at Wits and continued playing club in provincial cricket under the auspices of the South African Cricket Board. And during the initial years at university, I was captain of the Transvaal under-21 team. After completing my pharmacy degree, I did my internship as a pharmacist at Hillbrow Pharmacy and enrolled into medical school at Wits. I had less of an opportunity to devote to cricket, mostly because I ended up working from 6 p.m. to midnight to fund my studies. As far as cricket administration is concerned, in 2003, I was approached by the clubs from Lenasia, who persuaded me to take up a position on the Gauteng Cricket Board. The challenges at that time was that the Gauteng Cricket Board was still 70% white representation, and the black clubs felt that there was none or very few steps towards accelerating transformation. In 2005, the Gauteng Cricket Board, at the AGM, there was a move to bring on more black representation. Unfortunately, this was shot down by the majority clubs at the AGM, who happened to be white. And consequent to that, the late Justice Muhammad Jajba and myself led a walkout of all the black clubs. This precipitated in a crisis in Gauteng cricket, which led to a mediation process beginning. In 2009, there were further crises at Gauteng cricket. And subsequent to that, the sports ministry got involved, and they appointed Justice Langa to mediate, to try and allow and look at how diverse groups could work together. I was part of the Gauteng board that appointed Jeff Toyana as a Lions coach. At the time, a few of the board members were not convinced that he was the best person for the job. But a number of the black administrators backed his appointment, and he did very well as the Lions coach. And with the Lions teams that was predominantly black, he won a number of trophies. I resigned as Gauteng board member in 2015 because my travels with the Proteas made it difficult for me to devote enough attention to Gauteng cricket. Earlier this year, a vacancy arose at the Gauteng Lions board, and my club from Lenasia nominated me, and I'm again elected to serve onto that Gauteng Lions board. If we continue to have problems in the boardroom, be it at provincial or national level, it has a significant impact on the ability of Cricket South Africa to accelerate transformation. Corporate governance failures or lengthy boardroom battles result in cricket being in the news for the wrong reasons. Attracting more international games becomes challenging, and broadcasting revenue takes a knock, and sponsors tend to walk away from the game, making it very difficult to attract them. With a smaller pot of broadcasting and sponsorship revenue, this has a significant impact on the funding of or for transformation initiatives. We also need to move away from a belief in some circles that only black African administrators can serve the transformation agenda. We need to appreciate that there are good people in all communities, and that they have their hearts in the right place and can contribute to driving transformation in the sport of cricket. As far as Gauteng selector is concerned, I was a Gauteng selector in 2003, and I served that position for 2 years. In my time as selector, it was often difficult to convince fellow selectors and coaches that black players had the talent and deserved to be given the opportunities. In about 2005, there was an incident where I believed that a wicketkeeper who happened to be black needed to play in the Gauteng team because he was a better wicketkeeper and also a good batsman. The wicketkeeper had previously played for South Africa under-19 and had scored a century against England in an under-19 international game. My fellow selector and the coach were not in favor of the black wicketkeeper playing and instead believed that another wicketkeeper who happened to be white needed to be included in the team. We could not reach consensus on this issue, and I refused to sign off on the team that included the white wicketkeeper.
Can I just ask you there? What were they saying, if they were saying it at all, was the basis of their belief?
So belief at the time was...
informed their attitude, yes.
I think at the time they felt that the replacement wicketkeeper would perform much better. He had a bit more experience. But to me, I believe that's where our unconscious bias play a massive role in the selection of teams. Because if you have coaches at the time who were predominantly white or selectors that were white, they would generally give white players a lot more opportunities. We see that changing in the last few years, but in the early 90s and 2000s, it was a challenge in South African cricket.
Well, put it differently, did you think when you preferred that a black cricketer should have been selected, did you think that it was because there was a need for diversity in the team, or you felt that that black person whom you had in mind, in any event, on merit alone, would have made the team?
To be honest, I would say yes on both counts. The first count being that he should have made the team on merit. He had played for South Africa under-19. He had scored a century at Lords for them. He had come back to South Africa, but he had been given limited opportunities.
Okay.
And secondly, from a diversity perspective, it was important for people of all race groups to be given an opportunity to play provincial cricket.
Yes. Okay.
So at the time, the late Mohammed Jajbai, who was the chairman of the board, had to intervene, and eventually the black wicketkeeper was included, and he performed admirably. I was requested to travel with the Proteas team, the South African men's cricket team, to Bangladesh in 2003 as the team doctor. This wasn't a permanent appointment at the time, and it was made for that particular tour. At the time, interestingly, a few of the white players appeared to be uncomfortable to be attended to by a black doctor. But it did not bother me at all. After the initial barrier, it did not take long for them to get comfortable with me and to have confidence in my ability. It's very similar to when we went to university for the first time. It was difficult to interact with people of all races until on merit you were performing and you were receiving and achieving the marks, and then you were given the respect by your colleagues and the teachers and the lecturers. During the period 2003 to 2007, whenever the Proteas traveled to either the Indian subcontinent or the West Indies, I was asked to accompany the team as the traveling team doctor. This was not a permanent appointment, but instead on a tour-by-tour basis. I was also asked to travel as the team doctor to the 2007 World Cup, which was held in the West Indies. To the best of my recollection, the 2007 World Cup included 7 players of colour, namely Herschel Gibbs, Robin Peterson, Ashwell Prince, Roger Telemarcus, Makaya Ntini, Lourdes Bosman, and Charles Langeveld. The target at that stage was for 3 players to be included, 3 players of colour to be included in the playing 11. And to the best of my recollection, in all the games, the playing 11 included 3 black players. When it comes to team manager, in 2008, Cricket South Africa advertised for a newly created position of team manager. Prior to this, the late Ghulam Raja carried the title of team manager, but his role was changing to that of logistics manager, and Cricket South Africa wanted to split the role and created a new position of an executive team manager. A few of the then Proteas players, Ghulam Raja himself, and some others persuaded me to apply for the position. They felt that my prior role with the team and my previous involvement in cricket administration made me suitable for that position. I applied and was duly appointed as the Proteas team manager. While I was team manager, it was not necessary for the Proteas to have a doctor traveling with them because I fulfilled both roles. This saved Cricket South Africa in the region of 15 million rand if one takes into account the travel, accommodation and meal allowances together with the salary for the additional person. My team manager's responsibilities included promoting and protecting the spirit of the game, optimizing Cricket South Africa's commercial rights and properties, implementing continuous improvement processes, engaging with senior management of Cricket South Africa on their expenditure and initiatives, ensuring compliance with ICC regulations and playing conditions, fostering a positive relationship with ICC full member countries, ensuring that the Proteas squad complied with the ICC Code of Conduct, monitoring compliance of Cricket South Africa and ICC clothing and equipment rules, building morale and team culture, ensuring compliance with ICC's anti-corruption and safety and security rules, along with the team media manager taking responsibility for media communications, working alongside the team media manager to ensure international and local broadcaster commitments were met and delivered. Basically, to be the conduit between the team and Cricket South Africa management, and together with CSA's financial department, compiling and managing the budgets of the Proteas men's team. I also assisted in assessing, managing and treated the player illnesses, and is in association with the team physiotherapists, identifying, assessing and managing player injuries. Interestingly, in my role as team manager in the early days, in countries like England and Australia, certain administrators appeared to be uncomfortable engaging and working with a black team manager of a predominantly white team, and tried to only deal with the coach, who at the time was white. I had to assert my authority with the support of the then coach, and thereafter, those administrators accepted that they had to engage with me. In 2010, Graham Smith, who was the captain of the Proteas men's team at the time, and I believed that it was necessary to look at building an inclusive team culture and for members of the squad to have a greater appreciation of people from different backgrounds, races, and religions. The objective of building the team culture was to build an authentic, diverse, and inclusive sense of identity with due regard to our fractured pasts and history. So if you understand, as the Proteas team at the time, we were given a name Proteas, but there was no reason or meaning behind it. And for us, identity is always referred to as what we call the mind, the heartbeat, the voice and hands of any team or organization. And that gives birth to culture. Culture, on the other hand, is probably the most underestimated, yet misunderstood and mismanaged part of any organizational system. Yet in the context of team sports, it is one of the most powerful success factors or causes of failure. I believe that it was important for the team to talk about race, class, and culture. We needed to get people, but I was also conscious of the fact that building a team culture would not happen overnight. It required unwavering commitment, some strong leadership, and continuous reinforcement. In my view, transformation is a journey and not a destination. We need to get people to start behaving with a new way of thinking rather than to get them to think themselves into a new way of behaving.
But didn't you think that a decision having been taken in 1991 for unity in the various sporting institutions in cricket, in 2010, I mean, how many years were those?
That was close to almost 2 decades.
Yeah, almost a decade. What was your sense at that time in 2010? Because I can see that even at that stage, there was a view that things had to move, and that the unity must be evident. But I'm looking at a decade down from 1991. were these still expressed as aspirations, as beliefs of what needs to be done, or did you feel that there was no movement, or the movement that there was slow? I just want to get a sense of where, in this 30-year period that we're going to be looking at, where 10 years from 1991, you felt things were at.
If I could answer that and talk initially in the provincial setup, because that's where I was involved prior to getting involved with the Proteas, there were massive challenges. In 2003, working in the Gauteng Cricket Board, where they were supposed to or meant to be 50-50 representation, you still had 70% white board members. And that was 12 years down the line. The next 10 years, when it came to the national setup, although there was integration and the numbers were being reached, the targets and the quotas were being met, there were still challenges around integration where people needed to understand each other, they needed to get to know each other. There were issues around language, around race. So although there was an acceptance that we needed to move forward as far as transformation is concerned, there wasn't a general buy-in of how to action that. And I think it's, from a Protea setup, I think it's probably post-2010, where for the first time after we had our own mini sort of SJN, that we learned about each other and we allowed ourselves to move on from that. So there were definitely challenges prior to 2010.
Right.
Okay, so I believe it was important for the team to talk about race, class, and culture. But it was also conscious that building a team culture would not happen overnight. In my view, players of color in the 1990s and early 2000s had to work significantly harder than their white counterparts in order to be selected into the playing 11. And therein it lies the answer to your question, Advocate. This is unfortunately due to the inherent bias that some in our country have. We therefore held a culture camp in 2010 and were assisted by experts in the field of culture, diversity, and transformation. The late Ahmed Kathrada was one of the experts that assisted us during this camp. Prior to this camp, we engaged some sporting culture experts from the UK and New Zealand to assist us with developing team cultures. The aspects that needed to be addressed at the time was there was a lack of team identity. There were racial divisions, there were performance challenges, and there was no defined team culture that was identified. And these specialists at the camp assisted us with developing a team culture that was part of what the camp wanted to achieve. The specialists ran surveys both internally with the Protea squad members and fringe players, as well as externally with the public. Interestingly, the internal survey revealed that players valued integrity, loyalty, trustworthiness, and sacrificed for the team. And powerful comments included, and I quote, "We needed to find togetherness and respect for one another. Everyone is an equal in the team. We need to put passion in our country ahead of personal gain. We need to make more effort to get to know other individuals in the team." The external survey comprised of about 1,000 members from the public. It revealed that the Springbok rugby team were better ambassadors for South Africa than the Proteas team. And the reasons advanced for this were a winning culture and a team that is disciplined and professional. That's the Springboks. And they win World Cups and by doing so promote a sense of belonging among South Africans. I was a bit surprised by this, I must say, because at the time, even though the Proteas had not won a World Cup, they were the top-ranked test-playing nation and had more black players on a percentage basis than the Springboks. It highlighted to me how much a winning culture meant to South Africans. At the camp, there were frank discussions about race, politics, and the challenges that players of color experienced. Some players and members of management shed tears and about some of their painful experiences. We had tough conversations, there were productive conflict, and guys broke down. A stimulus video was developed and played at the camp, and I think it's about 4 minutes, and it's important for us to watch it. So if I can just ask for that to be played.
Yes.
Thank you.
I've been thinking a lot lately about what it means to represent South Africa and play for the Proteas. With 50 million people in such a huge country, Who do we play for? I think there's a bigger picture here for us. Our country seems to be at breaking point. And I think it's important we recognize how big our responsibility is.
Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments.
Who do we play for?
You represent me.
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 You guys represent me.
You represent us.
Great teams are founded on mutual respect. And that is the powerful lesson that sport can teach this country.
When you play the game as a professional, you want to play it with the same passion as when you were growing up as a kid. So whenever you remember when you played at school or high school and you looked at your heroes playing cricket at Lord's or at the Wanderers or at Newlands cricket ground, I think that feeling should never leave you as a cricket player. I mean, South Africa's got a winning culture, and whenever we don't win, people get a little bit hard on us. But if you look at the faces, how happy you can make people when you win, it's incredible.
The World Cup showed us what this country can achieve if we all pull together as a team.
My Test career ended when I was 26. It was a sacrifice that had to be made. South Africa was isolated, but it was better for the country. Are you guys really prepared to make sacrifices for your country, or is it about you?
We need leaders to prove to our people that we are united.
Who will inspire us next? We are now the team that can deliver this inspirational story to our people, day in and day out, not once a decade.
Absolute joy for South Africa.
I want to talk to you guys about Ubuntu.
In Africa, we have a concept known as Ubuntu.
Ubuntu is a South African idea that really is important to us, as most people outside of it don't understand the value thereof. You got to realize that no matter how wealthy you are, no matter how popular you are, it doesn't really matter. It depends entirely on how much you have an effect on the people around you. Those you love, those you care about, and also those that don't even know who you are and you don't even know who they are, but about the impact that you have and knowing that they're watching you all the time.
Whenever there's a fire that ravages everything in its way, a protea is the first thing to regenerate. A protea has a fascinating story all of its own. And when we meet up, we need to discuss the protea as a symbol. Our country is crying out for its next inspirational story.
And the champion golfer of the year, Louis Oosthuizen.
Natalie du Toit of South Africa. 2 wins in a week for the South African. Champion of the world. And the African Nations Cup belongs to South Africa.
We need to reinvent ourselves as the best team in the world. To achieve this in an inspirational way for our country, we need to be different to any other cricket team and any other South African team. We have the skill, but do we have the character?
So it's a video that we developed. It's called a stimulus video, because when we had the camp in 2010, this camp ran for 3 days, and it provided a stimulus for what the discussions and what future team culture was going to be.
And what year was this?
2010.
2010.
2010.
Right. Okay.
So the camp ran for 3 days and resulted in a stronger, player-led, collective, inclusive team identity. Ubuntu was articulated as our higher purpose for the team, and honesty, adaptability, and resilience emerged as the team collective's values. Interestingly enough, the Proteas are referenced in a book called Belonging in Chapter 3 by a world-famous performance coach, Mr. Owen Eastwood, and he talks specifically of how diversity was used to create a competitive advantage and transformational change, how we learned more about each other and the power of these kind of experiences. Prior to 2010, to answer your question again, there were major challenges to integrate players from different backgrounds. The camp was the start of a journey to get the team more united, and in my view, had positive outcomes. Gradually, more and more black players started coming through and doing well for the Proteas. I'm not suggesting that the camp was the sole reason for this. Targets or quotas also played a role. More diverse franchise and provincial teams, diversity amongst coaches and administrators in the affiliate members of Cricket South Africa also played its part. There's a lot more integration amongst players from different backgrounds after this camp, and it also helped that a lot more black players are coming through and excelling in the Proteas team. My initial contract as the team manager was for a 3-year period, and I was not very keen to have my contract renewed. In 2011, my contract was due to expire, and a few of the players and then the CEO of Cricket South Africa convinced me to serve for another 2 years. In 2015, I was looking to give up the team manager position, and I was requested to try and identify a successor. I had discussions with Protea legend Ashwell Prince at the time, but he was not interested in a management role. He wanted to pursue a career in coaching. South African cricket recently lost him, with him becoming the batting coach of the Bangladesh team. This is a pity. He is a highly intelligent and driven individual and has lots to offer South African cricket. Hopefully, after his stint with Bangladesh, Cricket South Africa can get him involved again in South African cricket. After failing to get Ashwell interested in the management role, I agreed to continue as team manager, and my last contract expired in September 2019. About 3 months prior to the expiry of my contract in 2019, I advised the president of Cricket South Africa at the time, Mr. Chris Enzani, that I no longer intended to be considered for the team manager role, and neither did I want to serve as the team doctor. I believed that the time was right for somebody new and with fresh ideas to come in and serve the team. It is a pity that the then CEO, Mr. Thabang Moreau, misled these hearings by suggesting that he had dismissed me. On the subject of quotas and targets, so quotas we describe as mandated outcomes, and targets it's probably aspirational goals. In my view, the targets or quotas gave opportunities to players of color, and many of them proved that they could be world-class performers on the international stage. Examples could include Makaya Ntini, Herschel Gibbs, Ashwell Prince, Hashim Amla, Vernon Philander, Kagiso Rabada, and Lungi Ngidi. They were undoubtedly good enough, but they may not have been given the necessary opportunities if it was not for the quotas or targets. The quotas and targets have, however, also had unintended consequences. We have not addressed the problems at grassroots level. Almost no cricket has been played at government schools, and our club cricket, which was a very strong in number of the black areas prior to unity, has regressed substantially. For as long as this remains the case, we will struggle to produce another Umfuneko Ngam, a protest player from the townships, and we will continue to rely on the Model C or private schools to produce protest players. Our underprivileged areas need role models from the community, and successful players from these communities can be the role models required to grow the games in such communities. Growing the game in these underprivileged areas may address some of the social ills like alcoholism, substance abuse, and gangsterism. In addition, quotas and targets have created a comfort zone for certain players who had become undroppable because the inclusion in a team is necessary to meet the quotas and the targets. A few of these players allowed their fitness levels to wane and were guilty of disciplinary misdemeanors. But those misdemeanors went unpunished because there were concerns that the quotas or targets would not be met. Previously, sections of the media focused on quotas and targets whenever games were lost. And there's a cartoon where Herschel Gibbs is aptly being asked whether he was a quota player, and his response was, "It depends if I'm in form or not." When black players go through a bad patch, some sections of the media are quick to suggest that they are in the squad because of the quotas and the targets. But they forget the excellent performances that these very players have put in series prior to this. We need more in our communities, in all our communities, to appreciate the value of diverse teams and how they help to break down the barriers and unite our nation. We need to embrace and promote diversity instead of complaining about it. In 2012, and despite the pressure that the Proteas team was under to meet transformation targets, with the partially transformed team, the Proteas became the first team ever to be ranked number 1 in all 3 formats of the game: the Test format, the One Day International, as well as the T20 format. The notion, therefore, that the need to transform results in the lowering of standards is not true. Targets are often a useful way to ensure that unconscious bias is mitigated and people from diverse backgrounds get an opportunity to play and contribute to a successful Proteas team. My experience in administration has revealed that there are a fair number of administrators that do not see themselves as the servants of the game, but rather make themselves available for appointment for financial gain and for status. Pre-1991, the administrators that served the South African Cricket Board and its affiliates were true servants of the game, who made no money from serving and often had to dig in deep into their own pockets to properly carry out their responsibilities as administrators. With very little resources, but with a lot of commitment and sacrifice, they ensured that the game was played by many. This is also, unfortunately, a notion. There is also, unfortunately, a notion that only black Africans can serve the transformation agenda. There are a number of good people in all our communities who have the interests of all our people at heart, who can advance the transformation agenda. The South African Cricketers Association.
Sorry, Doctor.
Sure.
It's the second time you are repeating this notion
Yes.
that only black Africans, can serve the transformation agenda, or at least there's that notion. Where is it coming from, or where have you experienced that perspective?
I experienced it both in the provincial setup, whilst I was a board member at Gauteng Cricket, as well as in the latter years of being an exco and a member of Cricket South Africa with the management, where often good people were turned away from the game, and there was a focus specifically on growing the game in the black African constituency, which I have no problem against or with. But I do feel that our target, our future should be for rather a non-racial and inclusive cricket community, rather than operating in silos in different race groups.
Okay, thank you very much.
I had an excellent working relationship with the South African Cricketers Association when I was team manager of the Proteas. In December 2019, and once I was no longer the team manager, a number of the Proteas players asked me to make myself available for appointment as a director of SECA. I agreed to do so, particularly because I believed that I could bring a different perspective to SECA. I joined SECA's board in December 2019. I'm determined to ensure that SECA carries out its responsibilities with due regard to the best interests of the players, but also the country at large. I'm advised that SECA has come in for some criticism during these hearings, and I trust that SECA will answer for itself. A good working relationship between the South African Cricketers Association and Cricket South Africa is important. Players are important stakeholders, and if they work hard to achieve success, Cricket South Africa will earn more in broadcast and sponsorship revenue. Around 25%, in the earlier years it was 20%, of revenue received by Cricket South Africa is allocated to the cost of players. Increased revenue can assist in funding the acceleration of transformation and the improvement of some very poor facilities in the underprivileged areas. Unfortunately, government is doing very little to improve or even maintain facilities in underprivileged areas, and consequently, less and less cricket is being played in such areas. This, however, hampers transformation. Coming to some of the allegations leveled against me, I'm advised that Mr. Thabang Moreau indicated in his testimony that he had been told by one of the players that prior to the 2019 World Cup, management of the Proteas team and a few of the players had convened a secret meeting during which they were discussing so-called Plan B in the event that the Proteas lost the World Cup. Apparently, this player advised Mr. Moreau that Plan B entailed the team blaming Mr. Moreau entirely for the losses of the Proteas, because the media disliked Mr. Moreau. Apparently, Mr. Moreau also indicated that I was one of the people that attended this meeting, and this had also been relayed to the board. I deny that I attended such a meeting. It is ludicrous to suggest that we were planning excuses for not winning the World Cup before the World Cup was even hosted. I also respectfully submit that if Mr. Moreau's version is true, and particularly if he had brought it to the knowledge of the then Cricket South Africa board, as he claims, they were remiss in not confronting the coaches, me, and the players that attended the meeting. If the discussion happened at the time, one would have expected them to discipline and in fact dismiss us at the time and to appoint a new management team with a group of players that had greater integrity. I challenged Mr. Moreau to explain why no disciplinary steps were taken against us and why we were sent to the World Cup if all of this was true prior to the World Cup. This seems to me to be nothing more than mischief-making and an attempt by Mr. Moreau to play the victim following his dismissal by Cricket South Africa for irregular conduct. I should also mention that after the 2019 World Cup, the then coach, captain, and I delivered reports to the Cricket South Africa board. None of the board members raised the alleged meeting that Mr. Moreau claims he was informed of by a player and which he disclosed to the board. The fact that the board did not raise it at the meeting at which we were delivering our report suggests to me that this is a fabrication. I'm also advised that Mr. Moreau claims we only raised the release of players in the Indian Premier League in 2019, a week before that IPL. It seems that Mr. Moreau's memory is failing him, and an objective document which is attached proves just that. In January 2019, almost 3 months before the release would have become necessary, the Proteas coach, Mr. Otis Gibson, had dinner with Mr. Moreau. During this dinner, the coach requested Mr. Moreau to liaise with the IPL to ensure that certain players, in respect of whom were either injury prone or we had workload concerns, were allowed to return early, which was 2 to 3 weeks before the 2019 50-over World Cup. Mr. Moreau advised the coach that he should leave that issue with him. In February 2019, a meeting was convened to discuss the issue of Cricket South Africa's CEO having to sign off on selection of each Proteas team for the games. On behalf of the team, the then captain of the team, the coach, and I attended. The convener of selectors was also present at this meeting. So was the CEO, the president, and the vice president of Cricket South Africa. Once again, at the meeting, the coach raised the workloads of players as a concern and the impact it would have on our World Cup preparations, and he asked whether the IPL or the BCCI were contacted. The then CEO indicated that he was working on the issue. On the 10th of March 2019, I personally raised the issue with Mr. Moreau. I got the impression at that stage that he had still not raised the issue with the BCCI or the IPL. Mr. Mukesh Gadja, who was Cricket South Africa's operations manager at the time, was instructed to write to the IPL to secure the release of 4 Proteas players. The 4 players were Faf du Plessis, Kagiso Rabada, Lungi Ngidi, and Quinton de Kock. Cricket South Africa's operations manager asked me to have a telephone call with the COO of the IPL on the issue. The CEO was not keen to release the players early and was very annoyed that this request was made so close to the start of the IPL. I then arranged with Cricket South Africa's head of medical committee to send a letter to support the early release of these players, and Cricket South Africa's cricket operations manager addressed the request on the 22nd of March 2019 with the head of the medical committee's letter to release these 4 players 2 weeks before the start of the World Cup. This, unfortunately, did not have the desired attached. All these documents are attached as Annexures 81, 85, and 86. Suffice to say, Mr. du Plessis, Rabada, and Quinton de Kock only returned from the IPL in the week prior to the World Cup, and so consequently we had to cut the pre-World Cup camp short. These players were not in peak condition during the World Cup. In the meanwhile, other countries such as England and Australia managed to secure the early release of their players from the IPL. It is therefore regrettable that Mr. Moreau tried to suggest that he was only allowed 1 week to secure the release of these 4 players. This had major consequences for the Proteas at the 2019 World Cup. there seems to be a material lack of understanding by some members of the current cricket structures, especially the financial model and how this impacts on the transformation agenda. After Mr. Arun Pangiso gave evidence, Dr. Eugenia Kula Amiawa tweeted as follows: "I'm not surprised that all this discrimination in salaries were under Dr. Musaji's watch. In the racism in sport, he justifies nonsense. Read the Makaya issue. I wonder if he declares players injured when they are not. God will punish people, here I tell you," unquote. I'm told that Mr. Pangiso testified that he chatted to me about the fact that non-playing members of a touring party earn substantially less than the playing members. This was true. This was in 2016. And it is correct that Mr. Pangiso raised his concerns with me. I had some sympathy for his concerns. I therefore encouraged him to speak to senior players in the team. I did this because even though I was going to raise it with the then CEO of Cricket South Africa and with SACA, I know that if Mr. Pangiso could get buy-in from the senior players, it would be a lot easier to convince for the change of distribution in match fees. The issue was not a big issue from the outset, because initially most of the squads would consist of around, say, 12 or 13 players, and the non-playing members would share a match fee 2 or 3 ways. So ideally, they would get at least 50% of a match fee. Once the squads became 15 or 16, the issue of the match fee for the reserve players became a bigger one. I'm also made to understand that most of the international cricket teams use a similar approach to the payment of match fees for reserve members of the squad, so that there is an incentive for players to work harder to try and get into the playing 11. I should point out that in regard to series win bonuses, all members of the touring squad share equally in that bonus. After that tour and pursuant to discussions that I had with Cricket South Africa and SACA, the position changed so that an additional match fee payment was introduced, and thereby the non-playing member of a squad received 50% of what a playing member would get. It is therefore unfortunate that Dr. Kula, who served the game for a very short period of time, tried to paint me on Twitter as being responsible for racist behavior. If as black administrators we attack each other without factual foundation of such an attack, we create further divisions amongst us. Unfortunately, over the years, there's been too many instances of disunity among black administrators, and this has also hampered transformation in our cricket. There's also apparently a suggestion by Mr. Lonwabo Tsotsobe that he was forced by Cricket South Africa's medical team to have surgery before a T20 World Cup in 2014. I suspect that this is an error on his part. Mr. Tsotsobe was part of the T20 World Cup squad in 2014, and the surgery or operation that he had was after that World Cup. Mr. Tsotsobe apparently suggested that he was forced by the Proteas medical team to go for surgery on his ankle. I made to understand that he was not specific about who exactly forced him to go for the surgery. I was not finally responsible for arranging surgeries or longer-term treatment for players. While I saw to players' medical needs on tour, the physiotherapist would arrange consultations with specialists in consultation with Cricket South Africa's head of medical and myself. I do not believe that Mr. Tsotsobe was forced to undergo surgery. My recollection is that he initially had a problem with his ankle in 2012. This problem was being managed by the team's physiotherapist together with a foot and ankle specialist that Cricket South Africa paid to treat Mr. Tsotsobe. The problem with his ankle had not completely healed despite medication, physiotherapy, appropriate rehabilitation and rest, as well as a cortisone injection into the ankle. By 2014, a foot and ankle specialist recommended that surgery was necessary as the problem was persisting and the cortisone was no longer having the desired impact. The surgery was recommended by the foot and ankle specialists, which the Cricket South Africa Medical Committee supported. Mr. Tsotsobe was not forced to go for surgery, and he agreed that the surgery was necessary for him. The surgery was successful, but after the operation and after playing franchise cricket, he developed a different injury on the same ankle. If we look at addendums 105, 106, and 107, it's unfortunate as Cricket South Africa had tried their best to provide for appropriate care and rehabilitation for Mr. Tsotsobe. And you would see from some of those documents that are quite confidential that Mr. Sotsobe was not always diligent in meeting doctors' appointments and attending to rehabilitation sessions. In fact, over a 4-year period, he had failed 15 out of 15 skin fold and 5 out of 7 fitness tests, which were objective tests that were necessary for selection at the time. These tests cannot be manipulated. It is therefore not correct for him to suggest that fitness was used as an excuse to keep him out of the team. I am aware of occasions that the criteria was actually relaxed only for him so that he could pass the fitness tests and be eligible for selection. I'm also advised that Mr. Sotsobe insinuated that I was guilty of racial discrimination and prejudice because I dishonestly suggested to the media that he was not fully fit when he was, and even though Mr. Philander was not fully fit at the time. I suggested that Mr. Philander had a chance of playing. I genuinely believe that Mr. Philander had a chance of recovering fully and playing in the next test. Contrary to what Mr. Sotsobe says, he had returned to the squad after having suffered a side strain. And there's a medical report, Addendum 107, confirming this. He was still easing himself into bowling at full pace, which required 4 to 6 weeks of rehabilitation, and had not fully recovered at that stage. My comments to the media were therefore based on medical evidence. Please also understand that I am not a selector, and I do not get involved in selection issues. Therefore, if Mr. Sotsobe was fully fit, and if the selectors felt that he should play in the next test, I could not have interfered with that. Mr. Sotsobe did not only have problems when he was with the Proteas. He was asked to leave the Essex squads in the United Kingdom after 5 weeks with the team. As is evident from the attached article, appendage or addendum 108, published on the 26th of May 2011, the Essex coach was quoted as saying the following about Mr. Sotsobe. His work rate and attitude hasn't been up to the standard I would expect of someone with his experience as an international cricketer. We have given him a great opportunity to come over to England and play county cricket. He has to look at himself since being over here and realize that he hasn't made the most of a great environment to play cricket with a good set of players. Unquote.
Where is this? Where are you reading from?
It's 108, Addendum 108.
I'm trying to...
It's a press article. This one here.
He's reading this article.
Okay. The annexes.
108, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Mr. Sotsobe should not be allowed to blame a foreign environment for his troubles overseas. Many other black cricketers from South Africa thrived on the county circuit, including Ashwell Prince, Alvaro Peterson, Makaya Intini, Hashim Amla, Robin Peterson, Wayne Parnell, Kagiso Rabada, and Vernon Philander. As opposed to being discriminated for being black, Mr. Sotsobe benefited from being black. An example of this is when he was initially left out of the Proteas squad for the 2013 tour to Sri Lanka. At the time, Proteas coach Russell Domingo was quoted in the media as saying, he had, and I quote, he had massive concerns about Lopsy's form, fitness, and possibly his work ethic. The decision to leave Mr. Sotsobe out of the touring squad was reversed by the Cricket South Africa board, as there was no other black South African cricketer in the touring squad, and Mr. Sotsobe travelled with the team. Coming to player misdemeanors, I am told that there has been a suggestion during these hearings that black players are dealt with more severely than white players for misdemeanors. This was not the case during my time as Proteas team manager from 2008 to 2019. By way of example, I attach on a confidential basis a note setting out 5 different misdemeanors by a single black player. Ordinarily, such a player would have received a warning after the first incident and would have faced disciplinary charges when the second incident occurred. The Proteas were keen to have the player in the squad at the time, as his inclusion was necessary to meet the quota targets, and this player was treated with kid gloves. He was only disciplined on the 6th occasion, and the sanction included the player consulting with specialists at Cricket South Africa's costs to assist and to guide him. I also understand that Mr. Tami Tsolekile mentioned that he would negotiate with me leaving from tours a few days before the rest of the team returned from a tour. This was a common occurrence for a number of players, both black and white. Once the team for the final test is announced, particularly on long tours, the 15th and sometimes the 14th man in the squad would be allowed to travel back to South Africa earlier than the rest of the squad, as the disappointment of not playing in the final test and the toll of being away from home on such a long tour were factors that were recognized in allowing players to come back a few days earlier. At no stage did these players that requested to leave early, both black and white, suggest to me that they wanted to do so because they did not fit in. Regarding the carrying of drinks, I am told that during these hearings, a question was asked as to why the reserve members of the squad have to carry drinks and why Cricket South Africa do not employ other staff members to carry drinks. The employment of other staff members to carry drinks is not permitted in terms of the International Cricket Council regulations. Only members of the squad and the physiotherapists and or team doctor when attending to injuries, nobody else, not even management, is allowed on the field. While in the early part of my stint as team manager, the reserve members of the squad were often black players and they carried the drinks. In the latter years of my stint as team manager, this changed, and the reserves were often white players too, and they also had to carry drinks. The carrying of drinks by reserve players is not unique to South Africa. All other cricket-playing nations also have their reserve players, amongst others, carrying the drinks.
Dr. Msagi? So, just with regards to these submissions, I mean, from paragraph 113, where in the second last line from paragraph 113, you say that at no stage did these players that requested to leave early, both black and white, suggest to me that they wanted to do so because they did not fit in. I hope you're not implying there or invalidating the fact that they might still have felt that they don't fit in and still wanted to leave. So, so I just want to understand that them not disclosing that doesn't mean that it wasn't the case or it wasn't the reasons for wanting to leave early.
100%. I think probably they didn't articulate it to me. That was the issue, but I agree with you 100%.
Right. And then with regards to the carrying of drinks, that was mentioned a lot during the SJN hearings, and the fact that the black players did not like that, because that it means that they articulated better. So in these paragraphs, I just want to understand: are you acknowledging their discomfort or their unhappiness with carrying of drinks? Like, do you acknowledge that? So,
I think we need to understand, in a cricket environment, you have 15 players on tour, and you have 11 playing. So if the 11 are playing, there's 4 players of color that are automatically the reserves. And they go to field. If somebody gets injured, they go onto the field, or they have to carry the drinks. The issue is there were times where a lot of the reserves, or many of the reserves, the majority of them were black players. And that's where their discomfort was, that a lot of them were not playing. But to counter that, what I'm clarifying is that you couldn't get other people to come and carry the drinks because they were only allowed to carry drinks. So you couldn't get a staff member or hire somebody to carry the drinks. According to ICC regulations, it's only the reserve members that are allowed to carry drinks.
Right.
I think that's where, when I read your affidavit, I think there's a misunderstanding of the real complaint. The real complaint, they appreciate that when you're a 12th man, you have to carry drinks. But it is the manner in which they are treated that is a problem. More especially when it is a black person who is that 12th man. You would not be allowed even an opportunity to rest. You would go and be asked to go get this when you come back. The very person who was next to this one was asking him to go and get a bottle of water, will ask him to go back. So that's the treatment that was an issue that was raised. And they saw the pattern that black players that are 12 men are treated differently from, they were even said to as far as saying, you will see that these white guys, they enjoy. They are happy because they are treated well. But it's a 12th man. But if it's a black person, it's a different case altogether. That is the main contention.
I see the merit in that argument. To me, the two issues would be, that's why something like diversity training was so important from a young age, right? And secondly, and I'd come to it a bit later when we talk about feedback in the team environment, where we try to create an environment where there was honest enough feedback for people to challenge each other. So if a person felt that he was being treated unfairly, right, he needed to articulate it either with the player involved or alternatively with who was the management at the time. Prior to 2010, I agree, it probably was very difficult to do that. But post-2010, there were mechanisms in place with which any player could raise it, and often it was anonymous. So you didn't have to feel that you were victimized.
Can I take you on that issue? Two instances, one as a doctor, the second one as a team manager. In both instances, you had, well, the other as a team manager, it was your Australian and New Zealand that were not comfortable to deal with you when you were leading this white team. But locally, your players, when as a doctor, they were uncomfortable with you.
Correct.
And instead of reporting that, you said, I'm going to prove myself. So you expect these players to report. But you could not even address those players to say, listen, I am here, I'm a doctor on merit, and I know what I'm doing. Instead, you left it to them to see that you are a capable person. Who did you report it to?
So we raised it at the appropriate. That's why I said when we had our own SJN hearings, that was the time I could challenge him at the time. And some of them did not even understand that they were being unconsciously biased or prejudiced to me. Because that's how, and let's go back and let's face facts here. In 1991, when unity took place in South Africa, you select a team to go represent your nation. You got people that are coming from different backgrounds, where people have been brought up, indoctrinated, that I'm superior to you, he's superior to me. And all of a sudden, I'm telling you, now you go play as equals. There was never diversity training. There was never conversations about it. People couldn't even understand. I mean, language was a problem. Type of food people ate was a problem. The way they practiced their religion is a problem. So that's why, 20 years later, the players themselves thought about the fact that, listen, we expected to go win World Cups for South Africa, but yet we don't even know about each other. And this started, that whole culture started, it was driven by the players themselves. And to Graham's credit as a captain of the team, if he's supposed to lead players across the line, he needs to understand what made people tick. And people have made mistakes. Everything was not perfect, I agree. I can say on my watch things have happened which I could have done better. But I think the most important thing is where's the learnings and where to from here. Okay. Any other questions from you, from yourself?
No,
nothing.
Yeah,
okay.
No, that's fine.
Okay, regarding the carrying of bags, I'm also told that Mr. Tsotsobe testified that because he was black, he was made by the senior players to carry their bags onto the bus. The carrying of bags to the bus was not at the insistence of senior players in the Proteas team. The logistics manager, initially it was Mr. Ghulam Raja, and after that we had two others, would be responsible for ensuring that all bags are loaded onto the team bus. For overseas tours, often there would be more than 100 bags to load onto the team bus. If the logistics manager could not find porters from the hotel or locals to assist him with the loading of the bus, he would request the youngest or newest capped players to assist him in loading the bag onto the bus. Race had nothing to do with who was chosen to load the bus. And white players that were part of the youngest capped players also had to assist in loading the bags. As far as remuneration for past transgressions is concerned, this is an issue that has regularly been raised in these hearings. Is whether compensation...
Can I just ask
Sure.
something? Why do you think he says that? Why do you... Are you saying he was being sensational when he said there was a pattern where blacks were the ones who were loading the bus and white players not? Are you saying that that did not happen, or are you saying he places too great an emphasis on it being a racial issue? It happened by chance. I got the sense when Tsotsobe was testifying about this that there was a trend that was noticeable. Was it not your experience at the time? I'm just asking.
So if I have to answer in two parts. The first was, it was never at the insistence of senior players. Senior players had nothing to do about carrying bags. It was always the logistics manager that was in charge.
Mm.
And secondly, I'm not sure why he said what he said, but what I can say is that having been with the team...
How do you know that it wasn't senior players? Like, did you speak to some of the senior players? Like, where do you get that evidence that it wasn't senior players that would insist that he carries the bags?
So the duty and responsibility of the bags was the logistics manager. When it came to management
Mr.
meetings...
Gulam
Raja.
Mm-hmm.
These were discussed. So part of our planning would be, we're leaving tomorrow to the airport, there's 100 bags, we'll get 3 guys to help us, these are young guys in the team. So that was part of the planning that we'd speak about. And that's why I am saying that I had seen white players carry bags as well. The fact that Lonwabo felt that it was only black players, I'm trying to understand why would he say that? Because I definitely saw white players. In fact, there were times I had to help carry bags because the volume of bags was just too much.
Yeah. And I also remember in his testimony saying that when he became a senior player, he didn't make any of the new guys carry bags. So yeah, something we'll just have to confirm. But I know that it was something that he was saying, that it was like a practice, where the black players were targeted to do that.
That's not true.
Yeah.
That I can say is not true. Black players were not targeted to do that.
Yeah. He is very specific and is directed to him. He said he was asked to carry bags, and nowhere does he say he was asked to carry bags by a logistic manager. Mm. He said by the senior players, and he understood that was a way of initiating the junior players. But when he became a senior player, that did not happen. When he looked back, the junior players who happened to be white were not asked to carry bags.
That is incorrect. In my experience with the team, that is incorrect. An issue that has regularly been raised in these hearings is whether compensation should be paid to those that were discriminated against in the past. I'm of the view that if the Ombudsman recommends such a compensation, it is likely to cause controversy and much unhappiness. How does one decide who is to be compensated? Is compensation limited to only those that played provincial and international cricket after 1992? If so, those that made sacrifices well before 1992 will feel hard done by. On the other hand, if a compensation fund is designed to compensate all cricketers that were discriminated against, there will not be sufficient funds to meaningfully compensate victims. At the moment, Cricket South Africa is dealing with limited financial resources, and we are better off addressing the wrongs of the past by making sure that we do not repeat the mistakes into the future. We should devote our resources to leveling the playing fields and advancing cricketers from disadvantaged communities so that we see future Proteas teams, including cricketers that have developed and excelled, playing cricket for township schools and clubs. A number of players suggested that they did not raise their concerns because they feared being victimized. We must promote a culture of honesty, and players must be encouraged to raise their concerns. In about 2016, Cricket South Africa's CEO, Mr. Harun Lorgat, Cricket South Africa's General Manager of Cricket, Mr. Corey van Zyl, and I agreed to introduce the completion of a feedback form by players and management. Players and management completed this on an anonymous basis and therefore could raise whatever issue they wanted to without the risk of being victimized. We often receive very good feedback, though, as this process about what we should do differently or how we could improve.
Sorry, Dr. Musaji. Sorry, we're going to just go back to this paragraph. It's just that you were reading a bit too fast when we were dealing with the remuneration for past transgressions. As you know, the Ombudsman, has spoken out quite a lot about that. In your paragraph 121, you say an issue that has been regularly been raised in these hearings is whether compensation should be paid to those that were discriminated against in the past. You say, I am of the view that if the Ombudsman recommends such compensation, it is likely to cause controversy and much unhappiness. So if you could just elaborate on why you're against our past players who claim to have been discriminated against financially, why you're opposing such compensation.
So thank you for that. And if you follow up to 122, it expands on this. Is that how would we decide on who gets compensated or why one gets compensated? Because we're dealing with many that have sacrificed for the game prior to 1992. So we could sit today and enjoy the fruits of a united South Africa and a cricketing community. And if we do so, the compensation fund would never be able to fund everybody that has made the sacrifices or have been discriminated against. We just won't have the kind of money that we're looking at from a numbers perspective. That's why I talk about controversy and unhappiness. So do we only contribute or compensate those that's post-1992? And what about those that have made the sacrifices before that have also been disadvantaged and discriminated against?
Well, there is a mandate period, and the mandate period is 1991 since 1991. And that mandate period is not arbitrary.
Sure.
It is informed by the intentions of those who felt that there was a need for unity. And I think this entire exercise is an examination of what has been achieved over the period, given the aims of the unity in cricket, and if it is so that it turns out that the original objectives in bringing unity in cricket have not been achieved. And if it is so that in the process there have been victims, that's what the terms of reference say. I didn't draft the terms of reference. It talks about victims and perpetrators. And I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not so sure whether our mandate extends to us establishing a basis for reparations. Because in my other life, I was in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and reparations were part and parcel of the makeup of that commission. I'm not so sure that in the current terms of reference, that is something that we need to be doing, because it also has to be done systematically, as scientifically as it can be done. But there is a basis, and if we want a precedent, a bad one at that, because even though we made the recommendations for reparations, our government, in their wisdom or lack thereof, didn't do anything of the nature that we recommended. But the point I'm making is that when once people say, and it is verifiable, that there was a level of inequality in the way in which we were remunerated. We're all cricketers, we're all batsmen, we're all bowlers, and there were even suggestions that there was a manipulation of who got selected to play because people were remunerated on the basis of how many games they played, how many tests they played in. And the consequence was that those who were selected on a frequent basis, and there was a coincidence that those who would be white players get more by way of remuneration than those who didn't get selected, and where it appeared that the selection had been premised on racial considerations as well. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this SJN project, is to find out whether, racial discrimination is more apparent than real. And if it is real, it would be remiss of me not to make some recommendations with regard to what I find, even if it is as a consequence of a very much, imperfect process. And I've said so very frequently. There has been no cross-examination. We have had to discard cross-examination, even if it was going to be limited cross-examination. Why? Because we operate under strictures of time. We have been told, hey, do this thing within this period of time. and that worries me. Because at the end of the day, and as I've been frequently saying, I don't want this thing when you came here, wasted your time, wasted your energy, and articulated what positions you took, and it all turns out to have been a talk shop. Because whatever recommendations we make, nobody's going to, to pay attention to. Or it is going to be looked at and say, but you didn't dig deeper than you ought to have dug. And it's all not a fault of either those like you who came or of those of us, who were probing. But we need to put the question for the records. Sure. And because there were testimonies which were very strong. I mean, Dr. Eugenia was very strong about whatever one thinks about her testimony. But those were things that were raised, where there are disparities of note in the remuneration system in cricket in the last 30 years, the nature of which causes others to feel that they were victims, and those who presided over that practice are considered to have been perpetrators and the perpetuators of a system of inequality, even in the earning capacities of the players.
I think fair point, and I agree with you that in an ideal world where resources are not constrained, it's very important that people get compensated. I mean, I had no understanding that it doesn't refer to terms of reference before 92, but the point is well made. It will probably only refer to what happened after 1992. In as far as remuneration is concerned, and I think sport in South Africa has that challenge. We see that in football as well, because remuneration is based on performance and selection. And what judges or what dictates performances and selection. So you're always going to have a coach that's involved and a selection committee that's involved. The unique thing with cricket, unlike football, in football you have a coach that selects the team and that's it. So it's one person that's responsible. In cricket, you have the coach that's responsible for taking the team out to perform. But you have a selection committee, often with at least 3 or 5 members, that dictate or guide who the players are going to be. So it's never going to be one person. There's always going to be a group or a committee that makes that decision. The second thing is that, having been involved in cricket for the last 2 decades, the one thing we were under no illusions is that it's very important for players of color to get an opportunity to be selected to play for South Africa. So it's one thing being selected, but it's a second thing being given the quality of opportunity. Right? And I'm sure through some of your presentations, you've realized that early on the quality of opportunity was a big issue. People would get selected, but they might not get the quality of opportunity. But as things have moved, particularly in the last decade, I think that quality of opportunity has increased. Whether you can say it's because of the quotas or targets, or because you've got more coaches, or because you've got more selectors now that are people of color, because we all have unconscious bias, whether you like it or not. And even when players get contracted, there are times when players ordinarily, if you just had to look at performance, they might not have made the contract listing. But because we value transformation even higher than performance in some cases, they would leapfrog some of the other players to make sure that they get contracted. Because the Proteas contracted players are only between 17 and 22. There isn't more than that over the years. The rest go into the provincial setup. So that 17 to 20 players, ideally, you would just look at performance. You look at the attributes, batsman, bowler, wicketkeeper, and the best 17 in there. But South Africa is different. We're different. We've got different challenges. We need to make sure that people that have never had the opportunity or were denied for long periods of time get the opportunity to play. And that's where something like transformation is important, even when the selectors decide on who the contracting players are going to be.
Yeah. Fair point.
Okay, so so 127. The forms that we've spoken about, it included, these feedback forms from players and management. It included sections on selection and team culture. In one instance, there was criticism regarding how communication to players went when they got left out of the team, and we devised solutions to address this. In another instance, players complained about selectors being mindful of their roles and not acting as coaches on tour. This was communicated to the selection panel at the time, so they were aware of where their role stopped. In a further instance, players asked for one-on-one feedback from the coaching staff at the end of each tour, and this was also then introduced. This form importantly included questions about whether individuals felt that they were treated with respect and in the same manner as other team members. The form also included questions about team environment, unity, and diversity. Since the completion of these forms were on an anonymous basis, players and management could be open and transparent about their feelings after each series, and this was then fed into a report which was submitted to Cricket South Africa's Cricket Committee, which was a subcommittee of the Cricket South Africa board, and it was chaired by a member of Cricket South Africa's board. The convener of selectors, Corrie van Zyl, as the general manager, and myself as the team manager were invitees to these cricket committee meetings. The cricket committee generally included an independent ex-cricketer, and in meetings that I attended included Robin Peterson or Gary Kirsten attending as the ex-cricketer. A representative of SACA also attended these meetings. I'm not sure whether this feedback process after each tour has continued after my time as team manager had come to an end. If the feedback process was discontinued, I urge the Ombudsman to include in his recommendation the reintroduction of this process in his recommendations, as it is a good way of identifying issues and giving players and management an anonymous platform to raise their concerns. Also, during my time as team manager and from at least 2003, the head coach, the convener of selectors, the general manager of Cricket South Africa, and I would meet each Protea contracted player along with his agent. Although the agent's presence was not compulsory, and some agreed to meet without the agent, for the purpose of a player development plan meeting. This was a dynamic tool which served as a roadmap which allowed, amongst other things, to discuss performances of the season, areas for players to improve, where they rank in contracting, opportunities for them to play in foreign leagues, and some of their post-cricket plans that were discussed. For example, if a player is interested in commentating after his career and is coming to the end of his playing career, my meetings were facilitated with broadcasters. My relationship with Cricket South Africa CEOs, during my time, I dealt with...
Musaji?
Sure.
Yes. So with regards to these feedback forms, or these forms that you introduced, did it make a difference? Were there follow-ups? Were there changes implemented after the complaints were received?
Most definitely. So every section where there was a suggestion being made or some people raised concerns, it was addressed, whether it was around selection, whether it was on performance, whether it was about the coaching staff, all of that was raised. The interesting thing is that, and that's why I bring it up, when it comes to things around feeling part of a squad, the unity, the diversity, post-2016, there was very little of that because every tour that took place, we had a culture camp. Cricket South Africa has spent in excess of about 5 million rand from 2010 on the Proteas team, specifically on culture camps. So before any tour, before we go on to any tour, we would have a culture camp specifically to connect with our higher purpose. Who do we play for, right? What our anchors are. You know, before it was honesty, adaptability, reliability, all of trustworthiness. Some of that has probably changed now because you've got a new coach, you've got a new management structure. Because that's what allows for the current group of people or players to play for each other.
Right. So would you say there is an improvement, or maybe during your time, you know, in the Proteas, was there an improvement in the team culture, team spirit as a result of the culture camps?
Most definitely. I watched Emma Bavuma do an interview a while ago when there were some issues that emanated from the SJN hearings. And it was interesting to hear him say that he had felt that he belonged from the time he walked into the Proteas setup. And that was from the fellow players, and not only from management and everyone else, but he felt like he belonged. And I think most of the players in the current setup, if you speak to them, they'll probably say the same because of the culture camps that allows them to learn more about each other. So if you're a new player that comes into a professional environment, there would almost be like a mock induction. Where do you come from? Tell us about your family. What do you do? What's your habits? You understand? So people can understand what's it about you that you bring to the environment, that you can contribute.
Right. And do you think the culture camps should also be introduced within the franchise system?
So interestingly enough, I think at one of the transformation in Davas, and I serve to be corrected, but I think it was about 2015, I was asked to do this presentation, particularly for all the franchises. And I know a few of them have taken it on board, but in their own way for what works for them. So they wanted some of it to filter down into the franchise system and the provincial setup. Because I think certain franchises are unique. I mean, if you look at Lions are different to what Eastern Cape would be different to what Western Cape would be. And, you know, in a senior environment, I always say, when you come into a team, and you see it in football now also, a team culture environment is generally driven by the senior players, right? Wherever you go. And if the senior players happen to all come from, say, Pretoria, chances are a lot of them will talk Afrikaans. If they happen to come from Durban and they happen to be Indian, they might enjoy a curry. If they happen to come from the Eastern Cape, the language might be different. So that the whole culture is perpetually evolving and changing. But it's driven by that environment. But the fact that you're going to have culture camps, you allow for people to feel part of it and not excluded.
Are the outcomes of these culture camps recorded anywhere?
Yes.
Are they for public consumption, or are they?
So I won't say for public consumption, but definitely within Cricket South Africa's systems. A lot of the reports would go through to the board or to the CEO, and a lot of it after every series. And so that means even if there's a new coach or a new manager that takes over, whatever's gone before him gets passed on, and then they take it to the next level.
So when CSA top brass people come before me in the next while, they would if we indicated to them that we are interested to see the outcomes of culture camps, whichever year they took place, they will probably have them.
Yes.
Be having them.
Yes. There's a summary of the entire culture camp processes that was passed on from myself to the director of cricket, to the head coach, to the team manager.
Okay.
After I depart, but everything that had happened over the years and where we are, and obviously it's for the next generation to take it along.
Okay.
No problem.
As I said, in fact, I think we must try and get a copy of the book called Belonging, because there's a whole section in there that references the Proteas and the higher purpose and the diversity and how they've used that to create a competitive advantage. I think the book was launched about 2 or 3 months ago.
And if they have clips such as the ones you showed us here,
yes,
it would also assist.
Okay.
Some of us are not reading as we used to do. These clips assist.
So during my time as team manager, I dealt with 5 different CEOs, albeit 2 of them were holding the post in the acting role. These 5 different CEOs were Gerald Majola, Jacques Fall, Mr. Harun Lorgat, Nasai Apia, and Mr. Dabang Moreau. Apart from Mr. Moreau, I had an excellent working relationship with all the other CEOs. In 2012, Cricket South Africa introduced an executive committee, or an EXCO, and as team manager, I was part of that EXCO. I attended Cricket South Africa EXCO meetings and had the ability to contribute to discussions affecting the national team and professional cricket. In about 2018, without any discussion with me, Cricket South Africa restructured. And by accident, I became aware that I was no longer an EXCO member. In those days, EXCO meetings would rotate between Cricket South Africa's head office, which is here, and the Centre of Excellence in Pretoria. I telephoned the then CEO's PA to find out where the EXCO meeting was being held. She advised me that the meeting was being held in Pretoria, but a few minutes later called to ask whether I was not called and advised that there was a restructure and I would not be part of that EXCO. I advised her that I was not informed of the same, and she confirmed that it was no longer necessary for me to attend EXCO meetings. This was the only communication I ever received about the issue.
Yeah. So you're also a victim, eh?
Black Lives Matter. Lungi Ngidi should be applauded for standing up and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. He's a remarkable individual who has shown maturity beyond his years. Unfortunately, some current players appear to be misinformed and believe that taking the knee is supporting the notion that Black lives matter more. They need to be educated so that they appreciate that taking the knee is all about a stand against racism and discrimination and supporting the notion that Black lives matter as much. It is a pity that the Proteas team have not adopted a unified approach to the issue and highlights that even though we have been having discussions for a number of years already, these discussions need to continue because we still have a long way to go to get all our people to fully appreciate the injustices of the past. I would like to see a recommendation from the Ombudsman and urging the Proteas to adopt a unified approach. In conclusion then, this country has immense potential as long as we focus on working together to address the imbalances of the past. Some white players, administrators still need to appreciate the value of diversity, the need to level the playing fields and to break down barriers. Some black players and administrators also need to recognize that they have contributed to further divisions in our society and need to be more inclusive and recognize that good people from all our communities are prepared to be sacrificial leaders and contribute to the desperately needed transformation agenda. A fully transformed and successful team will attract sponsors. It will contribute to more nations wanting to play series against us and thereby increase earnings through broadcast revenue. Let's appreciate that high standards of cricket at provincial and franchise level and successful Proteas men's and women's teams will create more role models in our communities and will help to grow the game. We need to get cricket played at the bulk of our government schools, and we need to focus again on club cricket. A strong schools cricket league together with a strong club culture will help accelerate transformation and will ensure that more in our country are attracted to this beautiful game. Thank you, Mr. Ombudsman, for giving me this opportunity, and strength to you in completing your reports and delivering your much-needed recommendations.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. I thought do you have any questions for?
Yes. Quite a number.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Remember, at the beginning, we allowed Mr.
Oh, yes,
to
speak to it. Oh, yes. All right. Okay.
But I want to start with the last part that he mentioned.
Can we just take 5 minutes?
Yes.
Little like 5 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you. Right. I just have to remind you that you are still on the road.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Chilai.
Yes. Mr. Musaji, your conclusion, I agree with part of what you're saying, that conclusion, but something that troubles me is the part where you say some black players and administrators also need to recognize that they have contributed to further divisions in our society. You are not for a moment suggesting that black people, whether they're administrators or not, they are causing division in the society. Because these people, in the context in which we are talking in, we're talking transformation and people who have been discriminated in the past. So in what way would they be the cause of division in the society?
So the reason I put that in there is, like I alluded to earlier when I spoke to the advocate, was in some of my experiences in the provincial structures, as well as in the national executive when I was part of the EXCO, is there was a notion of creating divisions amongst our own people rather than creating bridges for us to move forward. So in the Gauteng environment, as you would know, under Justice Langa, there was a cricket board that was constituted where people had to vote and operate in silos. So you had black Africans voting for black Africans, white people voting for whites, and you had coloureds and Indians voting for coloureds and Indians. But it was done with the best of intentions just to make sure that representation could be equalized. But after a while, when it served its purpose, the divisions seemed to be worse than it was before. And that's the reason why I put it in there. So as much as the whites need to understand that we need diversity, all I'm saying that as black people, we need to understand that we should not be creating more divisions unnecessarily.
Paragraph 29, maybe before paragraph 29, can we go to paragraph 99 of your affidavit? 99.
Yes.
There you talk about Tsotsobe and the World Cup.
Yes.
And you suggest that he might have gotten dates wrong, because according to your understanding,
yes,
the surgery took place after the World Cup.
Yes.
When was the World Cup?
In which month?
2014.
2014.
Yes. Which month?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Because
but I can check, because I think part of the addendum.
Yeah. I'm not intending to trick you at all.
Yes.
But
yes,
because we are all here to help this process.
Yes.
There's a document by Tsotsobe which is that he attached in his affidavit, and
yes,
it's dated 6th December 2014, and it's an article, which is one of the newspaper articles.
Yes.
It talks about him being forced to have ankle injury.
Ankle surgery.
Surgery.
Yes.
Earlier this year, and
Yes.
it's December 2014.
Yes.
So if it's earlier this year,
2014.
yeah, it would be interesting then when was the World Cup? Because he said as a result of that, he was missed his team's tours of Sri Lanka
Yes.
and Zimbabwe.
That's correct.
To
Yeah.
recover.
So the World Cup was before those tours.
The
World Cup was before those tours.
Was before
those tours. Yes, that's correct. So the surgery, when he had the surgery, those are the tours that he missed. Then it was after the World Cup.
Okay.
Zimbabwe definitely is the one that he missed, because India, it's written somewhere where he's been getting ready for the tour the plan for him to get ready for the tour to Zimbabwe. I'll just check. Here's it here on paragraph 105. If you look at, that's the report from the physiotherapist, the second line paragraph, decision for making availability for Zimbabwe tour.
Then the 3015, it's another article, January 2015.
Yes.
It says, who have done it? The man who was once upon a time The most frustrating one-day bowler in South African team currently seems to be at the wrong end of the frustration decision himself. Out of all the peculiar World Cup squad selection, the exclusion of Lonwabo Tsotsobe remains the most baffling. Does it mean that was he excluded or was he included?
I'm not sure.
My reading of this article, this is January.
I'm not sure because
13 January
I'm not involved in the selection part of, of squads.
No, I'm talking about him having participated in the World Cup. Because according to this article, it seems that he was excluded from playing in the World Cup.
Which World Cup?
That's question.
That's which World Cup? Because remember with cricket, in a 4-year cycle, there's 3 World Cups.
There's 3 World Cups. Okay.
So you have a 50-over World Cup,
yes,
and then you generally you tend to have 2, what we call 20-over World Cups.
Yes.
Almost a World Cup match every year.
Yeah.
If you can have 3 within 4.
Well, here, there's just a mention of a T20, but I don't want to mislead you as if, but I've not read the whole article. Okay. So we can pass that. Then, now, let's come to, on 2 occasions, which is paragraph 29 and paragraph 73, and this was followed up by Fumisa.
Yes.
About this mentioning of black African administrators.
Yes.
That they should not be it should not be this notion that they are the only people who can drive the transformation agenda. Before I make my comment, I just want to understand the angle from which you come from, because this has a number of angles. The one angle could be that you are saying, in fact, the African people that you may put there may not even carry out the agenda. That's one context. The other context, it could be, why are you always thinking and appointing black Africans and not look at other people who can carry out the agenda of transformation? Which of the two are you referring to?
Just rephrase the question again, please.
The first, I'm saying, on 2 occasions you make reference, and to me it sounds like it's something that is bothering you.
Yes.
That this issue of black African administrators being appointed on the understanding that they are champions of transformation, and anybody else is not. So I'm saying...
So let me answer that.
Yes.
I've got no issue with that.
Yes.
I think that it's very important, and we've had some very capable people from all communities, especially black Africans, that have driven the transformation agenda as well as the administration of cricket. Yeah. The second question? Or maybe...
In fact, what I did, I just wanted to get the context from which you...
The context, as I said to you earlier, is that in my involvement in provincial cricket and in my latter years with being part of the executive, there was an aim to create divisions amongst the black community.
Yeah.
Right. And what I'm trying to say is that we need to be looking at, the ultimate aim should be for a non-racial, inclusive cricketing community.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But bearing in mind that there's a lot of imbalances from the past, it needs to be redressed. With particular emphasis on black Africans, I understand that.
In fact, that's where I was getting to.
Definitely.
Because I wanted to say to you, much as we are all black people who must be looked after, but we were last in the pack.
Definitely.
African people were last in the pack, and it's a matter of fact. So when you then talk transformation, even amongst black people, if they are all black people are equal, you're colored, you're Indian, you're African, you would, in the form when you implement transformation. Sure. I'm talking about people who are equal, not because of just your color. Same capabilities, you have same capacity of doing things. African people will be given preference.
We're on the same page, 100%. We're on the same page.
Yes. There's a... Oh, the stimulus videos.
Yes. That you showed us.
Yes.
And that that was in 2020.
2010.
2010, sorry.
2010. Yes.
Now we are, then you resigned in 2019.
Yes.
Would you say, with all these videos,
yes,
these cultural conferences,
yes,
and you being there,
yes,
can you say without any doubt that there is no discrimination in cricket?
In my 18 years or 16 years with the team as team manager and team doctor, and I've said it before, there's definitely, I felt when I came into the system that there was prejudice. I felt I got treated that way. I understood that. And it could have been difficult for players of color before my time and how they felt. And I'm sure some have come and articulated it there. But certainly there was a lot more issues around unconscious bias than pure racism or prejudice. Because people needed to understand each other. You know, we talk about the fact that you got race, you got religion, and then you got culture. And sometimes we need to find each other somewhere halfway. And that's what the new generation of players have done, post-2010. Post-2010. Yeah. But prior to that, it was challenging, I'd agree.
Yes. Whether you call it prejudice or unconscious bias, the fact of the matter, it is racism. Because the other one, all what they were saying is implied. The other one is a direct one, where a person calls you a K word. But the unconscious bias is an implicit bias, is an implicit racism. You don't say it. Like in the case of a black person who could not be elected to be a wicket keeper, and you had problems with that, because meaning that black people can't be wicket keepers. That's an implied racism.
I'm not too sure with respect. I'm not too sure, because this is something that we had spoken about at some of our culture camps, is that how do you break down things? And I made a note here at one of our camps, is that if you look at race, you look at racism, you look at prejudice, you look at unconscious bias. And how do you filter each one out? So somebody asked me, okay, so when we talk about race, we talk about groups of people who have the same physical characteristics or same social qualities. When it comes to racism, it's the belief that some groups of human possess qualities that distinguishes us from somebody else and makes us superior to somebody else. That's the racism part. When it comes to the unconscious bias, and that's where the social stereotypes, whether we like it or not, about certain groups of people or individuals, you find that now these individuals form outside of their conscious bias. So for example, when Hashim Amla came into the team, and I give this example to a lot of people, a lot of the bias was automated and it was unintentional. Oh, his beard is too long, his bat goes, he plays across the line. And because of that, he had to work much harder than somebody else to get into the team and play. So you can't argue, one can argue to say that the selector of the time selected him or did not select him because of unconscious bias rather than pure racism.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to ask, to get clarity, you know, in your statement, you spoke about the black wicket keeper in your paragraph 34,
yes,
even though he was good enough and
yes,
and should have been considered, but you said there was a refusal, or you say my fellow selector and the coach were not in favor of this black wicket keeper playing, instead believed that another wicket keeper who happened to be white needed to be included in the team. What is that? Would you describe that as racism or unconscious bias?
So the coach at the time was not white. He was a person of color. The fellow selector was a white person. And I think at that time, their argument was that the wicketkeeper they wanted to play was more experienced and they wanted to back him. Whereas from the angle I was coming at, and I answered earlier to what the advocate asked, was diversity is important, but on merit he should have been selected. So to me, that was unconscious bias.
Well, that's a debate for another time.
Yes, I'm sure.
Academic debate.
That's why I'm interested that you raise it, because we debated it about it amongst ourselves as well within our group.
Yeah, to me, they are all forms of racism. They might define the way people do it, but all forms. For instance, if you refuse a person to be a batsman, because black people, they are
they don't have because of socialization and what they eat. They can't stand for a long period of time. You call that unconscious bias?
No, that I'll call racism. What I'll call unconscious bias, if you tell me, I want the batsman, but I want the left-hand batsman rather than the right-hand batsman. The left-hand batsman happened to be white and the right happened to be black. And now, because of that becomes your unconscious bias because you're looking for a certain quality in the batsman which separates what you're looking for.
There you are using a reason to exclude that black person, but you don't want to use the color. You are using the fact that now you want a left-handed because you know that the white guy is left-handed. It's still racism, but you are sugarcoating it by saying you want a left-handed as opposed to the right-handed.
So I hear you. The one, and I know this is a debate for another day, but if you look at the coach, and let's take color aside, and if he puts his team up, and he looks at the opposition, and he looks at the number of bowlers he's got right-handed, left-handed, and he looks to now assemble his players. In that, he'll put, okay, I want a top order batter that's a left-hander, right-hander. The fact that now the batters had to be a black person that you're leaving out, is it unconscious bias or is it racism? And that's where the debate comes in. Because had colour not been an issue, then we would have accepted it.
Okay. But my question stands.
Yeah, sure.
Still stands. Whether during your, during your 16 years of association with this organization, up to the time when you left, can you say there was no racism that you experienced? Not you as a doctor.
Yes.
When you came in and there were people who are uncomfortable.
Yes.
Would you say there was
I
no
think
racism?
pre-2010, there were definitely instances.
But why are we here now?
Sorry?
Why are we here today?
As I said, pre-2010, in the protest environment, you could say that there were instances. But post-2010, looking at how far we've come as a team, I think that there was no cases that I can tell you that I could say that that's racism.
What I'm saying is 2021 now.
Yes.
But Cricket South Africa felt that this issue of racism has to be dealt with once and for all. And they set up this
project
yes.
to deal exactly with that. And you are saying, no.
I'm not saying
From 2010.
I'm not saying that. All I'm saying, and you asked me a question, in the last 16 years, do I feel that there were incidences of racism, right? To which I said that there was definitely incidences of unconscious
before
bias.
2010.
Right, unconscious bias. But a lot of it had to be before 2010. Post-2010, especially amongst the players themselves, because of learning and belonging and the culture camps, that wasn't brought to my attention.
Dr. Mosaji, just out of interest, and I don't know if you're in a position to answer the question, but you are aware of Kaya Zondo's exclusion in the Proteas Men's Tour of India of 2015.
2015, right? Yes.
And what would you attribute that to, his exclusion at that time?
So I had a chat to Kaya at the time when he was, remember again, I'm not a selector, but being the manager of the team, when players have issues, they would come to me on many times. Lonwabo Tsotsobe has come to me on many, many occasions on different issues, personal issues, that's not even mentioned here. And that's where we would give the advice. And at that time, Kaya was very disappointed that he wasn't playing, and understandably. And my advice to him at that time was, you got to make sure that you keep putting the runs on the board and make sure that they have to pick you. He was disappointed that he wasn't playing. The merits behind why he was playing and why the selectors decided he should or shouldn't play, that was a different discussion completely. But because I was the manager of the team, I made sure that I didn't get involved in actual selection of the team.
And did you have any views on the basis for that exclusion, or that wouldn't concern you as a manager? Would that have anything?
No, it would concern me if there was any issues around racism at the time. But you had the selector on tour, you had the convener of selectors back home who was involved in it, you had the CEO that was part of that conversation, you had the captain, and Kaya himself. Kaya was disappointed that he didn't play. But the actual merits behind it could be argued both ways, where Russell Domingo was the coach, and they decided that they wanted to go with the senior player, because it was a final. That's a decision for them. I would have probably done something else, but that was a decision that they made.
So you're not of the opinion that it might have been I guess a racial or a race-based decision
On who? On the selectors' part?
On whoever made on those who made the final decision to exclude him.
So from my understanding, the final decision will sit with the selection committee, all right? And if they made the call, and if we're saying that they're racist, I find it difficult because there were more people of color on the selection committee than not. The team was selected by the selectors select the team.
All right, but in the hearings, we did hear from Mr. Manek,
Yes.
Mr. Hussein Manek, who said that ultimately it was a struggle between him and the captain, who was Mr. de Villiers at the time.
Yes.
I mean, there was a sense that was conveyed to us that, these senior players, what they wanted went. There was a way, it was unmentioned, but it seems that whoever was the selector, they had to do things in conformity with the wishes of the senior players. I don't know whether it's a question of perception, but that is how it was conveyed across to us by those who felt that the players, the white players, were especially in terms of their seniority, were given too much of a latitude to influence the composition of the team. Now, as manager, did you get that sense? Did you get that sense that the senior players, de Villiers and whoever else, had a lot more to do with indicating to the selectors themselves who they would want to be in the team?
So there's three aspects to that question.
Yeah.
The first for me is, and I think I alluded to earlier, is that in any team environment, the team culture and the environment is driven by the senior players. That's in any sport. I see it in football as well right now. And at that time, a lot of the senior players happen to be white. It's different now. Who's the senior players now? You've got Kagiso, Temba, those are the senior players that would influence a lot of the team culture, the team environment. Whether they influence actual selection, that's a separate debate. Because my understanding is that the captains shouldn't have a vote in selection. That's my understanding. Whether they influence it, that's a different debate completely. The second part to that is that the question that was asked is the captain was A.B. de Villiers at the time. So, was A.B., the question you're asking me, did I think was that racist, right? In my 15 years of working with A.B. de Villiers, I've never ever found him to be racist at all in the system, right? Whether that was a case of unconscious bias, that's a separate argument. And that we can say is semantics. How do you want to case it? Because in the team environment, we had spoken about it. So unconscious bias versus prejudice versus racism. And the third point is that if the senior players in any team environment influence selection, then there's a big problem in that. Because then why do you need a selection committee? Then you don't need selectors. So I think if I have to go back and look at that, if the captain gives input, which is allowed to, the coach is a selected part of the selection committee, the coach and the selection committee makes the call. That's what should happen.
And do you agree with Mr. Manek then when he says that his suggestion was that in cricket that the coach should be the person who has the final say on the team or on the playing 11?
Like like for instance in soccer, or in rugby.
The fundamental difference, Advocate, in soccer and rugby is that you have the coach that makes the call. It's a 1.5 hour game, And fundamentally, strategically, he can make changes and that's it. With cricket, it's different. You have the captain that takes the team across the line. And the decisions are actually made on the field by the captain, where the coach has very little influence. The bowling changes, all of that. So, and the length of the game is much longer. I mean, you play a 5-day test match sometimes. So it's easy to say that and it sounds ideal, but I think practically in reality it's very different. But the coach should always have a say in selection, definitely. Whether he should be the sole person, then in itself that can also lead to unconscious bias, because I think in most of the provincial sections or in the franchise systems, you probably have the coach that makes all the decisions, and some of the players have felt disadvantaged and disenfranchised there. So that's why you needed an independent selector to also give a different viewpoint.
Because the concern there was that at the end of the day, no one wants to take accountability on the final decision. So, for example, when players need to know why they were excluded or why they didn't get an opportunity to play, you know, they go to the coach refers them to the captain blames the selectors, you know, so there's a runaround on who made the final decision. Whereas what he was implying was that if there's only one person and the coach is the one that makes the final decision, then at least there's accountability.
I think to give clarity from a Cricket South Africa perspective, there's always been the squad that was selected by the selection committee, of which the convener is in charge. But then when on tour, right, you'd have the coach that will have a big input, and you've had a selector on tour then that makes the call. So you probably have two people that make the call on tour. Whereas prior to the tour, you have the whole committee that decides which 15 players goes along. And part of the challenges and why Cricket South Africa did that in particularly is to mitigate issues around unconscious bias and black players getting an opportunity in the early days of transformation. So in the early days when there was quotas or targets and we needed to have 3 players of color on the field, somebody needed to enforce it. And that's where the selectors on tour almost assisted the coach to make the decision.
You see, as you say, some of these things are probably going to be debates for another day. But when you are involved in an inquiry like this one, a lot also depends on the optics. What does this thing suggest to you? I think we have evidence here where an African player gets selected, they go to India or wherever the place was. He is there as a substitute in the event of a person getting injured. And as things are, the person gets injured, and instead of saying, by the way, you are here, this is why you are here,
yes,
somebody gets flown from South Africa 5.5 hours in the air to play in a match where there is an African player who I think was Zondo or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I don't know how one explains that. Because there has to be a reason why you say you will not play there if nobody gets injured. You are coming here as a substitute, you know, but you have been selected because, and he presumes it's on merit.
Yes.
Now comes the time that he must be allowed. He must automatically go and play, you know, as the substitute that he was coming on board to be, and then a decision by whoever is that you must fly somebody who happens to be white,
sure,
all the way from home, 5.5 to 6 hours of travel by plane. Even if you travel first class, it's still jet lag. Jet lag is still going to be jet lag. And so, you know, I sit here and I have to say, how do I debunk this perception from Zondo? When Zondo says, no, these guys are not serious about us. That's a difficult one. And I sympathize with the notion of unconscious bias. But I think it goes a lot. When you have that kind, I mean, one swallow does not make a sum. Sure. I can say simply because there's this record. But it bothers me because I say to myself, what actually informs this conduct? Is it something that all those culture camps have not been able to get rid of? Or is it the way we were brought up in this country? I mean, this country made it a point that the division was complete. You know, totally. If you were born in Guguletu, you dared not to be seen in the center of the city. you Yalabas Fergenoeg. They were a place called Fergenoeg. Far enough for you not to be. Though, of course, Fergenoeg apparently means something else. So I'm simply saying, yeah, maybe there is a way in which we need to be careful about these notions. But I do accept this unconscious bias. You know, it might be relied upon by people who say, "Hey, man, look," because it may well be so that there will be people who say, "Thanks to SJN project, because you know." What we were taking for granted, for various reasons. I mean, people who went to whites-only schools and went to whites-only universities and found themselves, you know, in careers where most of the people were whites. If they behave in a way in which they believe only in people with a white skin to have the capabilities that they have, because all that they know of black people are those people who were sweeping floors, who were doing A, B, C, D, and F, other than in leadership, you excuse that kind of mentality. But only to a point where you say, now we are making these kinds of conclusions. And I don't know if it's going to be sufficient to say it's unconscious bias. Because, yeah, unconscious bias, but then when once it assumes a particular posture, even as an unconscious bias, then it needs to be called what it is, you know. But I suppose that is for the Ombudsman to call.
I think you make the point right up front that optics is always important.
Yeah.
And I think there's instances that we at Cricket South Africa could have done a whole lot better when it comes to optics. Because you had genuine people like that who were there on merit that should have or could have been given the opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. I think where sometimes it skews the system is that, and not in Kaya's case, is that you would have a tour, you would have a squad of 15 players go on tour, and you'd have an injury to a player who happens to be a bowler. And now all of a sudden, the reserve is a batter. So it complicates things. Now you have to bring somebody else in. So pre-2010, and if we go to pre-2010, out of a 15-man squad, generally speaking, you only needed, say, 3 or 4 players of color on the field all the time, which meant that a lot of the black players didn't get an opportunity. They were reserves. If you look at it now, 50% of the squad has to be players of color, or with which at least 3 have to be black African. So you're finding that there's a lot more opportunities now in the last few years. There's a lot more players that are there on merit. And the challenge for Cricket South Africa right now is to build a nursery at franchise level. You need to make sure that you need to have enough players to select from.
Yeah.
Case we're being criticized for. Keep on referring to franchise. Franchise is no longer there.
Okay.
Next thing they will be
provincial.
saying they don't even know that information. Paragraph 68.
Yes.
I want you to tell me what, if this happened.
Yes.
If this indeed happened.
Yes.
How on earth do we think that this benefits
That's the point.
black people?
That's my point. That's why I put it here. That's the reason I put it here, is that we had players that were in the system, right, who knew that they would never get dropped because we needed to make the quotas.
But that's the thing, not dropped by who? Because the person who's not dropping is the person who's got an authority.
No, but this is where we counter, and I talk about it later. There was a time where the coach and the selectors dropped him to set an example. They dropped him, and we had 15 players, and the board forced us, and we added another player, so we ended up going with 16 on tour. Because the optics we talk about didn't look good, because now you didn't have a black African on tour at the time.
Because this is the player that you are definitely sure that you are not going to play.
No, he has to play.
That's a window dressing.
No, he has to play.
Because
he has to play because you need to make up the numbers, so he has to play. If he comes on tour, he has to play. That's why I'm saying that we've created a monster in a way. This is where the system has failed us. If we have enough players in the system, it's easy. I can leave you out because there's 5 others to select from. But if you're the only person now for the optics and for quotas that I need to select, then what do you do? It didn't happen once. It happened more than once.
Okay, Dr. Masaji, you know, as I read through your affidavit, I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I did find that there was this lack of sort of acknowledgement of some of the cries or the pain of the past players that they came to sort of articulate during the hearings. I just found it's just this rebuttal. So if the black players say they are made to carry drinks, in your affidavit you'll say white players also carry drinks. Black players say we carry bags, you'll say white players also carry bags. And so I just want to understand from you, like what during the SJN hearings, like, have you acknowledged about, you know, the from the players that came to testify? Like what do you acknowledge from that?
So it's difficult for me to answer because I haven't been following it, right? I mean, obviously I've answered on things that were definitely underneath my watch and it impacted on me. The challenge that I have is that some of the very players that are saying that they were treated this way, none of them at any stage brought these to my attention, and they brought a hell of a lot of other stuff to my attention. If they felt that they were treated that way, surely we could have done something about it in the past, because then it's probably a failure on my part that people didn't trust me to bring it to me. However, they brought a lot of other things to my attention at the time. So it's always about the intention. I'm trying to understand that why did they feel that way? And if they did, why wasn't it brought to our attention, or to my attention at least?
Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that at the time they were current players, so they were presently playing at the time, and now it might be easier? I mean, I don't know the answer to it, but like now they're speaking as former players and maybe it's easier to speak out now.
Yeah, perhaps, but I honestly think that we'd created an environment specifically post-2010 where people had the ability to hear their pleas and their cries heard. There were many players, both black and white, in the system that brought issues to the table where they felt that they were treated unfairly. And most of the time it was around selection or remuneration, most of the time.
Okay.
And it would be addressed. We'd have open conversations about it.
I think if you look at the allegations that they are making and you are responding to them, that they are making against you, couldn't it be that the reason why they did not come to you on certain issues, they viewed you as part of the system?
Could be. Could be.
The last question from my part, from my side, is the following. There's an affidavit by Tsotsole, and you seek to address that issue of Fernanda.
Yes.
But there's a part that you have not addressed, which is in paragraph 12 of his affidavit, which says, when you were asked a question about the readiness of Fernanda, whether he is going to play, you said Vernon suffered a mild strain to the remedial collateral ligament of his left knee while he was bowling today. That is on page 4, if you've got his affidavit.
Yes.
Right now, we are still confident he will be fine for the test. The challenge would have been if it was more. He is somewhere between 85 to 90% fit after suffering a side strain. Then he says, in answering the question whether I would be given an opportunity to play, Mr. Musaji stated the following: Lopsy is much better, but we are building him up slowly. But here's the problem that he has with the answer that you give to a News 24 journalist. You concluded by saying, should Philander be unfit to bowl on Monday, an unkept, is it Merchant, Delange, would almost likely make his debut. And indeed, true to form, he was the person who played when...
Yes.
Yes. He has a gripe with that,
yes.
To say he was being overlooked. He was part of the squad, and...
so if we look at paragraph 107, there's an injury report on the 28th of November 2011, which speaks to the injuries of every player in the Proteas team.
Yeah.
Right? And it clearly states the nature of Lonwabo's injury, which is a side strain, and he's a fast bowler, and it talks about 6 weeks to resolve. If you're looking at the date of 28th November, 6 weeks would take you into January. There's no way he was going to be 100% fit as a fast bowler, right? And that's the reason why we said we're building him up slowly, because the rate of re-injury is extremely high with that kind of injury. So this is what I'm reading from the report that I received.
So how are we building him? By including him and not play him?
So you're building him. So you bring him, first of all, when he comes into the national environment, the treatment is under the physiotherapist of the national team. The fitness regimen is under the regimen of the fitness trainer of the team. And then it's a range of where you work him up between 4 and 6 weeks. Okay. If he was a batsman, there's a bigger chance of him to play because he's not going to load that injury. Remember, as a bowler, as you know, they rotate.
Yes.
And that's the reason why. Okay. As far as the player replacing him, that would be the selectors that make the call. And because I did the press conference, the selectors had told me that Mashante has been added, and that's what I conveyed to the reporters.
My last question. Sorry to detain everyone. My last question, Dr. Musaji, and it's out of interest. And as the Ombuds said, it's not in our terms of reference to deal with reparations. However, I just found it interesting. I just want to understand, in paragraph 122 and 123 of your affidavit, you say if a compensation fund is designed to compensate all cricketers that were discriminated against, there will not be sufficient funds to meaningfully compensate victims. At the moment, CSA is dealing with limited financial resources, and we are better off addressing the wrongs of the past by making sure that we do not repeat the mistakes in the future. So I just want to understand in what capacity are you making this submission? Because I know you're saying that CSA is dealing with limited financial resources, and if I'm correct, that you only sit on the board of SACA, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So in what capacity do you make that statement about CSA? About
limited financial resources. It's on the figures that have come out at the AGM recently. And when we talk about a fund created to compensate all cricketers, in my mind, I'm talking of people that were disadvantaged prior to 1992. Obviously, that's before I knew what the terms of reference were, with respect. And I'm saying that currently the biggest challenge is grassroots cricket. If you look at all the townships, look at the facilities, look at the amount of games that are being played, you're trying to think, where is the next Kagiso Rabada going to come from? Is it going to be from the private schools or Model C schools, or is it going to come from Soweto or Alex? And at this moment in time, it's unlikely because there's no opportunities for him in Soweto or Alex. So sometimes that money might be better suited to try to address some of that imbalances of the past.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you
for your
work you're doing.
contribution, which has given us a balanced view of what the past was, and we hope that it will give us a basis to look at what the future should be. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Okay then. All right. Bye. We are adjourning until tomorrow at 10.
9 o'clock, sorry. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock.
Why?
Linda zoned, we have 3.
Linda, I don't see tomorrow.
9 o'clock. Oh, yeah.
You're the selector.
I'm told then.
Yeah. Maybe it doesn't figure on 9 because the doctors are